Hi there, this is Ron Rogers, and I'm going to talk about airline de-icing a pilot's view. Now, I've got a few digressions in here, but I think you'll find them interesting, and even one has to do with the miracle on the Hudson, and when I was chairman of the ALPA National New Aircraft Committee, a discussion I had with Airbus about their ditching switch. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay, you're walking out to your flight and you see this. Well, okay, first of all, well, it's nice, it's sunny, but you're not getting out on time. You are just not getting out on time. Well, you may technically get out on time, but you won't arrive on time because you got to go through a de-icing procedure, and that's gonna take a bit of time. All right. Well, it works great. Okay, and the systems have really improved on how they're doing the de-icing. But back when I was involved in this as an airline pilot, and over my 25 years as captain, I've de-iced many, many times. And of course, as the other crew members, yeah, there's an experience as the other crew member I won't tell you about. But it's really progressed. And you look at these nice facilities with these nice long arms and these big booms. And you see the cage up there. Well, that is nice. Now, I know a lot of mechanics. There's one when we go out for pizza every Wednesday night. There's this couple. He's a former United mechanic, and he used to do the de-icing when they didn't have this nice little cab there. And the thing about having the cab is when you are exposed and the wind's blowing, the de-icing fluid can come right back into your face. And let me tell you, this glycol stuff is not your friend. It is not a nice substance. And back in the days when I was a second officer on the 727, now this is kind of interesting. They were de-icing the airplane at the gate. I go out the jetway and down. On the other side of the aircraft, unbeknownst to me, I didn't see it, but the de-icing crew was starting. And they shot the de-icing fluid on the side of the aircraft, and it came over. And I was totally drenched in glycol. I mean, I came back totally, my outer coat was totally dripping and wet, and it's like the captain going, where do you think you're going to hang that? So it was a bit of a problem, and I was just soaked. That is not nice stuff, let me tell you. One of the things they don't tell you about the joys of being an airline pilot. And one other thing is, you got your choice of de-icing while the engines are running or not running. It's kind of, it kind of depends on the situation whether you're shut down or not. But one thing that you don't want is you don't want sucking the glycol in through the bleed. The aircraft engine bleeds, and you can kind of see, well, we all know that these little guys can suck in a lot of air, and you don't want to be anywhere near that. And the thing is, every bit of air that you as a passenger, when the engines are running, take in basically comes through the engine. It comes through the compressor section. When the air is compressed, it goes up to about 600 degrees C because when you compress air, you heat it. When you expand air, it cools. That's how, this is air conditioning 101. So when you compress it, you heat it up. Well, most of the air goes through the engine. Now, the bleed air, it's used for de-icing and all sorts of stuff. But it also goes into the passenger cabin, and so you can't run 600 degrees C air into the cabin. I mean, the people would be saying, "Hey, flight attendants, please, can you turn the temperature down?" It's a little bit on the hot side, to say the least. So you have to run it through an air conditioner pack that cools it down. It goes through all this process and gives you nice conditioned air. But the thing about, and you've probably seen this recently, if you get smoke in the cabin during flight, usually shortly after takeoff, that's because you've had typically an oil seal go bad in the engine, and you're getting that oil smoke, which is coming through the engine into the air, leaking usually in the compressor section, and it's getting in the cabin. Not good stuff at all. But you also don't want the glycol to come in. So we have very extensive procedures. Now, there are two basic types of de-icing. You can do it at the gate, or you can do it just before taking off. Now, typically, if you've had accumulation either from the aircraft flown in or it's overnight and it's a nice clear sky and you're not going to have to deal with icing at all, then you can just de-ice at the gate and you're ready to go. But there are certain procedures, and they have to coordinate with you and all the ground crew checks. And I'll talk about how the pilots check for the wing contamination and stuff in just a second. But basically, it's always the captain's responsibility. But they communicate with you on the type of the fluid that's being used, and we have holdover times if it's still precipitating. But I'll talk about some of the different de-icing fluids, and I will try to not make this as boring as the typical training video. But one of the things here is you have to be very careful that you got the bleed air shut off, you got the air conditioning pack shut off, because you don't want to ingest any of this glycol, because that is super nasty stuff, and you can get it in the cabin, and you got a lot of problems. Another thing you have to consider is after you start your taxiing out. Well, it's probably common sense, but you don't get close to the aircraft in front of you. This isn't like Air Florida where they're trying to sneak up behind the aircraft in front of them so they can use the heat from that aircraft to de-ice your airplane. Not a good move at all, as everybody knows on how the Air Florida accident turned out there. But basically, you taxi out, and you have certain run-up procedures to do, which is kind of interesting. You're supposed to run up the engines to make sure that you don't have any icing on the probes or on the spinner, because the spinner isn't de-iced, and you can get ice on that, and they'll throw it through, and it's not a good thing. So you have to do run-up checks to make sure all that is working. And you also have remote pad de-icing. Now, this is the type of de-icing you typically do if it's actively snowing. Like I said, if it's a clear day and you can just blow it off with what's known as type 1, I'll show you this in a second, you're good to go. But if it's snowing, now you got a problem, because you got to get you want to get the aircraft clean just before you take off, and any snow that accumulates has to be taken care of by the fluid. And there's certain types of fluids, and some of them are kind of cool. And I saw this as a passenger, the one type of de-icing fluid that it puts a nice layer on it, and it absorbs the snow that's falling down. So you got this kind of gooey, gelatinous type of mess on the wing. But as you take off, the whole thing shears off. It's really kind of cool to watch. I watched it, sitting back near the wing one time as a passenger, and it's really kind of cool. Now, some of the considerations as you're taxiing out is you got to leave the flaps up, especially if you have slush on the taxiway and that. And you got an active snow event. This can be going on. So you leave the flaps up to the last minute till you're just getting ready to take the runway, and then you put them into position, which of course can concern some passengers. They think the flaps aren't, in the proper position. But you get the thing flaps down for takeoff position. You get it configured. You get on the runway, and then you tell Tower that you're going to need about 15 seconds. They know what's going on. You got to run up the engines to typically 60% N1 to make sure they're good. You run them up. You look at it. You make sure all the engine instruments look good. You get your 15-second time. You hack the clock, and then boom, you're good and you go. So it works out quite well. But there are a lot of procedures, a lot of considerations, and there's an interesting holdover from the old 737-200 days. The 737-200 had an issue if you were using like flaps 1, which it was a very low setting. And basically, you got the leading edge slats out, and you had any contamination, you could get a pitch up on rotation because of the disturbed airflow across the wing. If you had any contamination whatsoever that you didn't see, and I knew some people who got into a very serious situation, pitched up. They were able to survive it all right, but it was not a good situation. So on the old 737-200s, we used to use a minimum flaps 5, because in that configuration you didn't have the pitch up problem. But on that aircraft, you typically took off with flaps 1 a lot, basically because of aircraft performance and stuff like that. But I mentioned in the procedure, you have this ditching switch that Airbus has, and what this switch basically does is it closes all of the doors below the water line. And I had a little discussion with them, and I said, hey, I've seen pictures of aircraft that have ditched. It's extremely rare situation, but the aircraft used to be much more sturdy, thicker aluminum, stuff like that. Now it's so thin. In fact, some of the people who worked on the MD-80 at McDonnell Douglas called it Reynolds wrap because the aluminum was so thin. But I said, you look at any modern airliner that's gone into the water, and it's all torn up. the bottom of the airplane's torn up. And of course, on the Miracle on the Hudson, that happened quickly, and flying out of LaGuardia, I mean, there was no other place to go. It's good they could get in between the bridges because with all the housing and the trees and everything, there was no place to go but the river. But the one thing I wanted to know was, did they close the ditching switch? And of course, there was so much going on. That's for a planned ditching. So no, I found out they did not close that switch. But if you look at the fuselage when they pulled it out of the water, the whole bottom was kind of torn up. So I digress there. Now, our operations manual also had times that you would use the wing or engine anti-de-ice, various conditions and stuff like that. Now, the nice thing about the later aircraft, like the 777, is you put this stuff in auto. And you have this little device, this mechanical device that rotates. It's a little wheel, and it's got little ridges on it that ice can accumulate on, and it's got a little device that kind of picks off the ice. And so if the amount of energy it takes to turn this thing goes up because it's chipping off the ice, it says, "Hey, you got ice out there," and we turn on the wing or engine anti-ice automatically, and it's kind of fun. We'd be flying in at times. You're not even thinking that you got really bad condition, then all of a sudden you see WAI, wing anti-ice on. You go, that's kind of cool. Now, some other aspects of how this whole thing operates. If you sit down and you see one of these triangles next to your window, you want to get out of there because that triangle symbolizes the weakest structural part of the airplane, and we all know what can happen there. No, I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. That little diamond there that you may see, that is what the aircraft manufacturer designates as the designated viewing port. That is the place, and this occurs on the ground. I didn't have a good ground picture of this, but that occurs on the ground where this is the place where you can go to and get a good look at the wing to make sure it's clear. And if you've ever been in one of these situations, you're taking off and it's snowy and stuff like that, and a pilot comes walking back and he says, "Can I kind of sneak in your row there?" He's going to look at that designated spot to make sure it looks clear. And of course, this process, with the new cabs and the new arms, it's so nice. But I was told, and this is a little bit dated, but for like the bigger the airplane, the longer it takes to de-ice. And I was told one time that to de-ice a 777 was like $10,000. And of course, there's a lot of environmental issues now, and they like to not necessarily do it at the gate area because they don't have the infrastructure set up there to recover the glycol and prevent it from going in just the normal sewage system, which you don't really necessarily want. But the best thing is the remote pad de-icing situation where you get the airplane out. You're next to the runway. I mean, you get this thing de-iced, and the guys are clear. They give you the holdover times and stuff like that. Oh, I love this. You get the holdover times and stuff like that, and you're number one, essentially number one to go, and you've got virtually no wait, and it's really a great thing. And one of the nice things about these remote de-icing pads is they can recover the fluid, and it takes up a lot of concrete. And they're putting them at the big airports. The new Denver airport has them, and they're putting them at Chicago. They're not, of course, next to all the runways necessarily because it just takes up so much concrete. But it's nice that you can get right up to the end of the runway. You don't worry about all the contamination on the airplane, and you can get the thing de-iced. And of course, the bigger the airplane, the bigger the process. Now, which fluid is right and how many fluids do we have? Well, we've got typically 4 fluids. We got the type 1 fluid, and these are all of differing colors, so you can tell what's on there. And basically, this is a fluid that just kind of clears stuff off. And, you have a certain amount of time that you can have if you've got a little bit of snow before you can take off and the stuff is still supposed to work. And you have the type 2, the type 3, and the type 4. And the interesting thing about the higher types is they have much longer holdovers. Like if you've got the type 4, you can have over an hour holdover time. And but here you're getting into with the higher fluids where they actually collect the snow. They give you kind of the slushy component on the top, and then you have to have a minimum speed that this has to blow off, because you need to shear this off. Otherwise, you're taking with slush on the wings, and that's not good at all. So you have to have enough speed that this stuff will blow off. And there are depictions of what the various types look like. And yeah, this is part of the glamour of being an airline pilot here, is you got really funny colored wings out there. And there's the straw colored. And of course, another things they do, they make sure that the freezing point of the fluid gives you the protection you want. And of course, here's another, it really looks beautiful here. Fortunately, all this stuff shears off, blows off as you get going. And again, it's a big process with the booms. This is what it looked like from inside the boom. And here's the boom around the engines. And of course, the fuselage is always neat when they come up and start spraying that off. And here are a picture of a boom coming up there. It's like you're in heavy rain on the ground. But I want to tell you about an experience I had. Now, being part of a training video is a good thing, except it wasn't good for a guy in my class. We called him, his name was Roy. I'm not going to tell you his last name, but we called him Fast Burner Roy, because they made a training video about an engine fire he had on takeoff. And this is on takeoff. This is an AI I got. Now, I love AI. Do not let them design your airplane, because this is a picture of, I wanted a T-37 with an engine fire. Okay, I got that. That's the red arrow. But they neglected to put a canopy on. Now, I like flying open cockpit, within reason. I have my open cockpit biplane. I'm not a high altitude like these. These guys are tough. I mean, they're sitting there, no canopy. I mean, they're tough. I don't know why AI. Don't let AI design your airplanes, because you'll probably end up with a convertible. I mean, it's no good whatsoever. But anyway, Roy was the subject of a learning center film, because Roy took off, and I mean, they even had the audio. This is what you like. And he takes off. He gets a fire indication on the engine, and he declares an emergency. And the controller asks, "What's your emergency?" He goes, "Fire!" I mean, it's like his voice is like 3 octaves higher. Okay, and this is on the Learning Center. It's probably gone by now. It's been so long ago. But his voice was high there, and he requests immediately to come around. He gets in too tight. He doesn't really do the procedure properly. He doesn't shut the engine down. It ends up overheating the spar. He ends up having to go around and come back around land. So it was not good at all. But what am I leading up here to? Well, it's okay to be on a training video. And this is a case where I was asked to be on a training video. They're filming this de-icing procedure, so I said, okay, I'll give you my Screen Actors Guild card so I can get the royalties. And they go, what? And I go, no, I'm just kidding. There are no, I'm not going to get any royalties. But here you see the guy now. They're ready to start the de-icing. You see the guy with the little yellow ear though. He has those little wands, and they're supposed to have the wands. If you don't have the wands, you're not supposed to taxi. Can't just use hand signals. You have to have the wands. And he's got them crossed, holding them in one hand, which means brakes are set. And we have to tell the de-icing people that, yeah, we've gone through the procedure. We've properly configured the aircraft, and once we've configured the aircraft, then they can start de-icing. So they're taking pictures of me, I'm taking pictures of them, and I'm looking at this, and this is kind of strange. And it's really kind of eerie. And of course, the more they spray, the more it becomes opaque. And I'm going, this looks familiar. And I'm trying to go, what is this? This just looks familiar. And then I go, oh yeah, I've seen this before. This is an alien creature. And of course, it's from the War of the Words, War of the Worlds. Easy for me to say. Okay, this is the original version. Yep, that's what it looks like. Looks like these guys. Okay, kind of scary, but I digress. And then they go on, and of course it messes up the windows and stuff, but this all clears off. So that's a little kind of brief exposure about the de-icing procedure without hopefully putting anybody to sleep like at a training film. But, in civilian aviation, we don't, have the money to hire a crew to come out with the big equipment. And if you get snowed in, Well, the best you can do is hope for spring or have a hanger. And early on, I couldn't afford a hanger for my airplanes, and they set out quite a bit. And I had covers that I could cover them, but they get covered in snow, and you're probably going to wait for spring. Anyway, that's my little digression on airline de-icing. I hope you found it interesting and informative. Thanks for watching.